A warm welcome to a new episode of Artificial Intelligence in Human Resource Applications. My name is Christian Montel. Hi, it's very nice to have you again. In the previous episode, I had the honor to talk to researcher Larissa Pomrehn about some of the latest research outcomes to understand our customers, namely the applicants and employees' points of view. We were talking about some aspects to be kept in mind to build, shape, and maintain a strong employer brand. And once again, this came down to the major challenge, which is you have to define what kind of reference knowledge you want to teach the AI in order to be executed or used in a regular way. So what's the reference knowledge you want to be applied? Today, we're going to be focusing more on knowledge which is suitable for human resource professionals and provide some background information. Larissa is going to talk about some of the backgrounds of methodology. So how is the knowledge we believe to have about artificial intelligence actually generated in research? What's the time and effort which has to be invested into the mindful introduction of AI into your human resource processes? And once again, this comes down to some key questions which seem simple and easy, but are not so easy to be answered. First of all, who's actually impacted by a decision? Secondly, who's in control or who believes to be in control of this decision? And third, does the long-term or the short-term view on an outcome actually matter more? So let's get right to it. Once again, a very warm welcome to today's special guest, Larissa Pomrehn. Where do the data you base your research on actually come from?
Yeah, let me give you a quick overview of the different type of methodologies we actually use currently.
Right.
The first one being is that we have hypothetical scenarios in experimental research. What does that mean? We give a scenario to a participant that states different types of things. For example, in an application scenario, an AI is used for resume screening or for an asynchronous interview. And the participants then afterwards say how they feel about this, which emotions are evoked. For example, how fair do they perceive the scenario to be, or how trustworthy is the system or the organization employing these types of tools. And what we do is that we compare an AI scenario with a human scenario in most cases.
Mm-hmm.
So in one scenario, the AI is used, and in another scenario, the human makes the decision. So afterwards, we can see the differences that actually occurred between human and AI. So we have a comparison. This is an experimental scenario because in surveys, we only send out questions but have no comparison. But we do experiments, so we have a manipulation of some sort. We also do interviews in our study methodology. This allows us to get more in detail about how participants feel about AI. So with the experiments, as I told you, we have certain questions that we ask the participants, but they don't really have a chance to add anything or to say, oh, I also have this emotion, because we in advance kind of categorize which emotions might be important in that case. Mm-hmm. And interviewees can state more in detail how they feel. So it goes more in an exploratory way, which type of emotions are even evoked, because maybe we don't even know yet exactly. We go deeper into the type of feelings they might have. And also, this is a good way to see other areas which may be also interesting besides emotions. In our case with HR professionals, they stated a lot more about long or short-term outcomes that appear with AI usage on the daily. They can tell which type of AI tools they actually use. This stuff is harder to get with experiments because we have more like scales where they say, oh, yes, I like this that much or not that much. That type of comparison. What we always have, like I said, with long or short-term outcomes, we always have an outcome. in qualitative research as well as in these experiments. So we get the emotions, we have this scenario, we get the emotions, but then also have some sort of outcome interesting for the organizations, because otherwise you could say, well, they perceive it as not fair, but why does it matter to me? Then we get important organizational outcomes, for example, turnover intention or organizational attractiveness. So that's something practical that the organization can actually do something with. When they see, AI usage leads to higher turnover intention, that's really bad for us. So that's why we maybe not use this, or we use this depending on the outcome of the results. What we lastly do is a meta-analysis. This takes these single studies with all these hypothetical scenarios where human and AI are compared, and we take them to a more broader level. Because when those constructs are similar in these studies, we can aggregate them and see what is the overall effect. In our case, is it more positive or negative? How is AI perceived? Do we have more appreciation or do we have aversion? These types of questions can be answered with the meta-analysis, because we can have one aggregate effect above all the studies that are currently out there. And yes, another type of methodology, but in this type of methodology, we don't actually produce any data ourselves. We just use existing data and then do some analyses with them to get.
We have been focusing on the critical aspects of how AI support is perceived in a recruiting process so far very much. But what I wonder is there an upside to it? What do applicants and employees actually like about AI?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because we asked ourselves the same thing, right? Because previous research has focused more on negative aspects, or they found, it's not perceived as fairly, it's not as trustworthy, etc. So we thought, we don't know if truly the case, if that's a real depiction of how applicants and employees currently perceive AI, because in the studies we always introduce certain measurements, but we all focus on some, so we have to leave out some measurements, and you never truly know if that's actually everything measured accordingly, or is there something missing. So what we did to kind of go a little bit deeper into this, we looked at different newspapers and articles that evolve around AI. And we got confirmation from these newspapers to scrape their data, which is really great. Nowadays, it's a bit difficult. You cannot just scrape data, so you always have to get confirmation for doing so. And yeah, we did different search work, for example, artificial intelligence or machine learning. We put that into the online newspapers, and we scraped all the data that evolved around AI and the other search terms as well. And then we had this big chunk of data, this huge document with all of these different articles. And now we were able to perform some analyses with it. And with text like these, we can perform, for example, a sentiment analysis that you can detach or attach a sentiment to each word or each phrase of this text. Maybe I can explain a bit more for you to understand what it is.
Perfect.
Yeah, because there's different dictionaries out there that you can download for free that have certain phrases. And the dictionary focused on technology and emotions, and we took this dictionary because it's very fitting to our case, right? And there are words, a long list of words. Each word gets a sentiment score that can be positive, can be 0, indicating neutral, or negative. Something like happy, for example, has a positive score. Something like miserable, for example, has a negative score. And then the AI goes through each of these text words and gets the score, and then you can get an overall score of the whole document, of each phrases. You can do like analyses for different years as well, stuff like this. And yeah, we did that, and we found that most sentences and words were phrased positively. And that was very interesting for us because we expected it to be more neutral because, you know, we're looking at newspapers, not so much like self-created text or something.
Okay.
But we found that most of them were positive. And that is a first indication of what we thought before is correct, right? So that we have this inclination of it's maybe not only negative, it's also positive. Yes, that is
Okay.
the case. And we also say that when looking at newspapers, they are opinion building, right? So
Mhm.
just always want to write and publish something that people read. So we can infer that if they write positively, maybe also the opinion and AI similarly, because otherwise they would write differently, right? We also did analysis of words. So we can see the most used words in the framing, but also in the negative framing. And that's where it got interesting because we have our measurements, our study. We can cluster some of these words together so that we can have one measurement and that we can do for the positive and the negative side. For the negative side, they were pretty obvious because those were the measures that were already introduced time and time again in these studies. So
I see.
fairness,
Yeah.
trust, all of these things, creepiness that we talked about before. But now we have these positive measurements, and we found focus more on innovativeness, on performance, also speed, decision making, so that the processes are a lot faster in the organization. Yeah, then we had it. Like we had these now positive stereotypes that are associated with AI, and we included them in the study and wanted to see if we find real evidence, because for now we just used the overall opinion and wanted to check if it's really, if you manipulate it, if that's truly the case.
So to
Yeah,
sum it
and
up in some way, there is a lot of fear around the introduction of AI in a recruiting process in a professional way, on the one hand. On the other hand, there is some, say, general positive stereotype connected with it, like, for example, and what is that exactly? What do people feel, or what does the scraping of the newspapers indicate? What are the feelings which are on the positive side connected with AI? Could you like give us a short overview about this?
yeah, sure. Like I said, the feelings are not so emotional. So what we see is that we see more words according to innovativeness, performance, efficiency, that in the first glance do not look like emotions, right? We can still feel about an organization that it's innovative or not. That's still a feeling. And that's still interesting for organizations, right? Because they would wish to be perceived very innovative rather than not innovative. So we took those as the positive stereotypes because those are the positive words, but also because you can kind of change them into emotions. So we don't say innovativeness, we say perceived innovativeness of the organization now, or of the decision process, and this is introduced. And yeah, like I said, on innovativeness, performance, efficiency, speed in the decision making, that were like the major ones where we found words that could connect to this. And yeah, going to the study now.
Okay, just to interrupt you at a moment there, can you already give us like a direction of an advice for a company which thinks about introducing more AI or less AI into their recruiting process? Because we have been focusing on the negative aspects very much, or on the problematic aspects so far, and now you say it's perceived in a general way quite positively. So is this too early, or may I ask you for your personal advice how to introduce AI into a recruiting process?
Yeah, maybe let's go into the study outcome, because
Okay.
now with the study outcome, we have found more evidence that it's actually the case or not, because just taking data from newspapers is qualitatively not enough to say, oh, well, it's also just positive, let's all use AI and forget about the negative things.
Yeah.
That would be too early to do. So when we introduced this in a study, we said, okay, we have these stereotypes that we asked participants about algorithmic decision making, and we used it in different contexts. So not only recruiting, because we said previous research focused on these context specificities, and we wanted to replicate and say, well, if it's a negative way, maybe it's also in the positive way. So we also introduced it in employee of, like a very dramatic introduction of AI, right? And we found that these positive stereotypes and negative stereotypes persist at the same time. So finding evidence for what we found before in the newspapers now with the vignette study as well. And interesting now, because I mean, it also makes sense. We don't have an only negative or only positive opinion about something all the time. There's a fine line where we maybe, you know, gravitate to the one side or gravitate to the other side, and we find this with these findings. So a person is not always positive or negative about it. But we also see that some people might be find it unfair, but at the same time find it innovative. So we have these stereotypes existing at the same time. And this is important for organizations to note, because now they can say, okay, first of all, it's not only perceived, which is a good thing. We can now maybe be a bit more forward with these types of AIs, but also we can cater, maybe use specific words that, you know, go through these positive stereotypes in more detail. We can use maybe innovative, progress, you know, decision processes are faster, because now we know these triggers the positive perceptions of AI, and we can focus more on them in the process.
It sounds like it's say, an ideal point in the time continuum to kind of decide whether you want to shape the perception of your to-be employees in a positive or in a negative way, as long as you're aware of this tension between the negative stereotypes and the positive stereotypes. Is that right?
Exactly. So you can cater to those positive ones by, you know, really into them when you state the process, the decision process. You can really gravitate towards these more positive tones. And never forget that there's still maybe negative perceptions coming along the way as well. But you can also prepare for this, because research already told that transparency is a huge factor when receiving AIs. The more transparent you are in the process, where you describe a lot about the AI system, what does it do, for which type of processes is it introduced, or is it the final decision? Does a human overlook this in the end as well? These type of things help with this negative perceptions. So now we feel like we have quite good guides for organizations, you know, to reduce the negative perceptions, but also go more on positive perceptions as well. And what we also introduced in this study is that we differentiated between the impact of the decision. So we said, okay, well, AI is introduced now so much, so the decision in the future might not be human versus AI, because that's what previous studies did a lot of the time. We rather said, well, it's probably always will be AI. The other option is not available anymore, because you need to stay competitive, everything like that. And we said now maybe the difference is not about usage, it's about if you're personally affected by a decision. And we found this in the sense that applicants, employees, directly affected. So the scenario description from previous studies were always, you are in this action process, the AI is making a decision about you, you are affected by the outcome, that's it. But I thought about, okay, not everyone is affected. There's a lot of other stakeholders involved in this. Maybe going back to the newspapers, you could also just read about it. You know, there's an organization now employing AI in the recruiting process. What do you feel about this? Right? There's different types of people involved in this. And that's exactly what we did. So we introduced one scenario, this traditional scenario where an employee is affected by this decision, and another scenario where a person only reads about it in news. So very general, you open the newspaper and now see an article about organization employing AI. then you close the newspaper and you go about your day again. And what we saw is actually these stereotypes were more positive when you're not personally affected compared to the person who is directly affected. Makes sense, right? Yeah, but
makes sense.
when we go into the reasoning of this, it's more like, okay, when I'm personally affected, I don't have any clue who else is applying or who else makes of the decision, for example, going into a recruiting scenario. But as a person being that you only read about it, you're like, okay, this is great. Overall, it's probably better. The organization is doing very well. An organization use this again and say, it's good to go to newspapers to talk about your AI usage. It's good to tell it on your website, on your social media. You should do all of these things because it's perceived better, more positively with these stereotypes that we found. But you always have to keep in mind, when the people are then affected, when it comes to them going into the process, this shifts, so their perceptions get worse. And then you have to do all the things I talked about before, being transparent about the process, caring about them, still trying to be, okay, I want to get to know you and only you and stuff like this.
That sounds like a typical marketing challenge, like, hey, the product out there is very interesting on the one hand, but once I really use this product, I get completely different feelings, expectations, experience, and so on and so on. And companies should be aware of this kind of shift happening once you cross this border. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And we found now evidence for this because before it was more, not really sure. I think organizations were also very hesitant to talk about it very openly, except for the decision process itself. As we found that shouldn't be the case. You can report about it. You can maybe have testimonials, people talking about their experiences, that this all helps with employer brand. Your organization will be perceived more innovative and more performant. This is all things you really want as an organization, right? So that would be my advice.
When we were talking earlier, you mentioned that research indicated that HR professionals have quite a different perspective on the implementation of AI support than applicants or employees have. Could you tell us more about that? Could you tell us more about what is specific to an HR professional point of view to the introduction of AI?
Yeah, sure. When we look at applicants and employees, we see that they're only affected by the outcome of the decision. In the process itself, when AI is introduced, they don't have any interaction points. They don't have any say in that AI is introduced, what it does. They're just affected by what is done by the organization. And that kind of reflects when we look at HR professionals, because it is different. They might not have too much say when AI is introduced or which type of AI. This also depends on the organization. There's some organizations that have very a lot of interaction or iteration processes before AI is introduced. The AI professionals are included to the process. They have a say in which type of AI is introduced. It also depends a little bit on the cost, where they don't have too much say mostly, but they have a little bit more knowledge and in the process itself, they are very much more integrated and have more decisions that they can also make themselves. And research has shown that that really makes a difference, because when you are more, favorable to this AI because you've decided yourself, oh, this is the type of AI I would like to use, you are then more favorable when you're using it, and you are feeling towards it much more different. This type of effect
that sounds from a psychological point of view, that sounds totally understandable, because you have more control about the process. You're not only on the receiving end, but you also can design things. And as you said it, you have a say on what is happening a bit more than you have as an employee or applicant.
Exactly. And over time, they also have this time perspective. Applicants and employees go through an application process might also take a few days or weeks as well, of course, but the interaction with AI does not take days or weeks. So you have time point you come across this AI and maybe once again, but then that's it. But for HR professionals, they integrate it and then they use it over a longer period of time, like every day, every week, they get to know the system, they get to know how to interact with it, the positives, the negatives. So they not only just know more about the system, which we also found to be positively related perceptions, right? When we have a lot more information about the system, but also this time perspective that this first maybe hesitance or maybe like, oh, we don't know what the system does, goes away over time. So we have different types of perspectives that come in. And when we talk to HR professionals in form of interviews, we found this as well, that they have short-term outcome from this usage, but they also have long-term outcomes. And this we don't see so much with employees or applicants because they're just, like I said, affected by a time. They might even, chose to not apply to this organization when they read it's about AI, so they don't come into contact with it at all. This depends on the person. But with the HR professionals, we have this time perspective. And with some outcomes, we, for example, have something like, oh, this is very satisfactory because it increases my efficiency. I can direct very many tasks to this AI and I don't have to do them myself anymore. And then long might be, oh, my work balance increases, right? Because I have focus to do much other tasks that are maybe more interesting or more complex to me. So AI takes more of these administrative tasks. Of course, this depends very much on the AI introduced, but that was just most of it was what we were found where AI was introduced for administrative tasks, like simpler tasks. So the HR professionals focus more on their complex and interesting, creative, fun tasks. So it improved their work-life balance in the end. And what we also see for HR professionals is this level of personal impact that I've talked about before as well, because they are making the decision, they're giving the decision to someone else. They're not directly affected by it. Of course, they are maybe a bit more involved than someone only reading about it on the news because they make the decision. And if it comes back with questions, they should be able to answer the reasoning, why they decide to reject or confirm someone in the application process. But overall, they still give the decision to someone else. They're not affected by it. So they're still much more flexible. And they have a much bigger overview. For example, in the application process, they see, okay, we maybe have 50 applicants. Now AI comes into place, and then we maybe have 40 to the next round, and et cetera, et cetera. So they want that overall fairness for the decision is maximized, that in the end, they have the best candidate with the fairest decision process. But for the applicant or the employee, they have more narrow view. They only see themselves. They don't know how many other people are out there. They don't know their background, their history, their discrimination experience, maybe all these types of things they don't know. They just want to have the best outcome for themselves. For an application that is, I want to be the person that is employed, right?
Of course, yeah.
And in the end, I don't really care too much why, because we never really know why we were employed. We were just employed and we were happy about the decision, but we don't care if it was because of the contacts we had, that could bring us in or something like this. We just happy that we are there and that we got the job we wanted. But we forget about the others that are involved, and that maybe overall fairness is better when AI is introduced and now you don't get the job maybe, but someone else, which was the fair decision. You don't really say like, okay, great, fairest decision, but I still have to get a job. I still need to pay money. These like basic necessities are disregarded in that sense. So that's why applicant employees perceive it much more negatively, because they just have this more narrow view, and HR professionals have the bigger picture. They focus on overall fairness, and they have the interaction thing as well, that they are able to interact much more freely with the system.
I see, because it seems to boil down like to the very basic psychological concept of who's in control in a situation. You know, like when you're an HR professional, then you have a say in how to introduce it, for what parts to use it, and so on and so on. And how is the time span designed for the introduction process and things like that. And you don't have this when you're on the receiving end as an employee or as an applicant. Yeah.
Exactly. As you say, introduction process, this is something we also talked with them, like HR professionals,
Okay.
because this takes a long time to find the right AI, to find the right plan with the recruiter, to find the right cost scheme that fits to them. Also, you know, I work with company data is also been a struggle because companies have their own terms, their own language, and the AI is just working for itself. And especially when we look at something as screening, fitting the words that you want from the organization to the tool, that's very difficult because then, you know, IT has to work very closely with HR, and also a lot of other stakeholders like legal department comes in as well. There's so many people involved, and you have to always mediate between stakeholders so that, you know, it fits better, like the overall AI fits better to company.
Can you share some details about, say, the typical size of project groups? How many people are involved from how many departments in a usual introductory process, and how long does this take usually? You can give us only spans. It's obvious, but I would like to know, like, to how much to these sizes. I'd like to know more specific details. Could you share some of them?
So this is very individual to
Yeah.
the company, but I would say it starts from like 5, and there's project there where there were like really many people, like 40, 50 people, counting everyone, like even the smaller people having like just one time experience it with it, but they're still involved somehow. And you really have to have a great project management experiences, and people who know a lot about this, so we can manage this effectively. And from the time, which was interesting because they all thought it was much quicker than it actually was. It took sometimes years to actually come to a first introduction, also because of the legal department, because, you know, we in Germany, we are very focused on data privacy and that all the laws are adhered to. And the legal department had to make sure that everything that is, you know, in this now is the right thing to do, because we about like negative examples about when data is spilled. That's very bad employer branding. So people or like organizations try to reduce this as much as they can. And this is a lot of work for legal department, which you also maybe think about in the first sense too much. You think, okay, well, it's in the HR department, you know, I get some HR people involved, but in the end, it takes over the whole organization. And we advise organizations in general to not only have HR strategy with AI, but you have to understand and introduce AI as a whole. How do you deal with AI in the whole organization? And then HR is just a category of it. And then you have to, in HR, you have more personal data. So it's a specific case. You have to be more careful, but make more specific rules for this case rather than, you know, getting involved every time again. And yeah.
Exactly. That sounds like it is a fiction to believe that you buy some product off the shelf and it kind of does all the things in a magical way for you, exactly the way you want to do it. So it's a longer term process. You were mentioning even years and sometimes like many people involved and so on and so on. That sounds like actually a bit of a challenge and a thing which has to be planned on many dimensions in a very, say, straightforward or clearly laid out way.
Yes, it is, but you have to think about why you're doing it. In the end, on the long term, once you have all this data, because this is another point, having the data available,
Mhm.
organizing data within the HR department is a huge task for them, because you have to take it from various different areas. And
Mhm.
sometimes it depends on the organizational setup, but when you have very selected groups, they don't have these interaction points where they can share data very quickly.
I see.
So this goes in as well, that you have to organize the data, you have to gather this data over months or maybe even years, as I said, so that the algorithm can work, because with no input, the
Mhm.
output is not or really bad. This is another point that's taking a long time.
And
But once you have it all set up,
from a corporate perspective, I'm also wondering, it seems that there is, on the one hand, an interaction between, say, the people and the AI, but on the other hand, it seems like people are well advised to gather at some point and talk about whether it is going into the right direction. We were talking earlier about things like people get aware of how they have been deciding before on HR things. Once the artificial intelligence mimics what they are doing, and so this leads to an interesting, say, amount of discussion. And how are companies handling that, or are they even aware? What do you think? Are they even aware that there are processes which also have many political implications, ethical implications? To what extent are they aware that it takes time to talk about this, no matter how far AI has been evolving so far?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because I feel like I think I hinted at this a bit before. Organizations try to hide a bit. They try to just be like, okay, I'm not talking about this
Mm-hmm.
on the radar. But I feel like it makes more sense to actually take a stance and to introduce these discussions within the HR department, to introduce them to the employees, because yeah, no, in a few years, it will just be common sense to introduce AI. And if you're not doing it, you will be behind. So a lot of competitiveness gets lost if you don't do this. And when I talked to the employees, they sometimes felt like exactly what you mentioned before. It's just a one-time thing. We just implement it. That's it. We will have more efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
Great,
Yeah,
But
yeah.
the implications coming from this, they don't really feel, or at least it was my impression, that it's not out there that much yet. But the employees catch up to it faster and try to, bring it to the upper management and to react very quickly. And
Mm-hmm.
also with setup of the organization, you have to be a much more agile nowadays. So things like this, I mean, this is not something new telling you.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're just telling organizations for years to be more agile, to build up agile teams, that, the communication is a lot faster. Like these communication lanes, they make it so much longer and so much more, it's exhausting for everyone involved to see AI to be introduced. So in the end, I would advise to introduce these discussions, make your employees also aware of the effects, but also at the same time, introduce more agile teams to be more flexible. But you don't have that just for AI, you have to do it in general to nowadays keep with changes. We saw it with the pandemic as well, that you have to just be very quick on your feet to come up out of a risky situation.
Once again, thank you very much for taking the time and providing so many interesting details. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, it was a pleasure as well. Thanks so much for having me, and can't wait to talk to you soon.
Thank you. Have a good time. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye.
Bye. In case you got any thoughts you would like to share, any feedback or pending questions you'd like to discuss further, please send me an email to webcast@iligo.de. If you missed a previous episode, you can access the archive of all the episodes we have done so far under www.iligo.de/webcast. You might have to hit the unblock content button first, depending on the settings of your browser, Don't let yourself be intimidated by that. I promise it's worth it. And please consider signing up to allow us to keep you updated in advance once there are latest news. The next episode of Artificial Intelligence in Human Resource Applications will be airing on Friday, July 5th, 2024 at 14 CET. So one more time, thank you very much for joining us on www.eligo.de/webcast. All the best for your current and future endeavors, and may you have a beautiful day. Goodbye.